Well, why be concerned other than the morality of all this? I'd like to just share a few quotes from other people who have looked at this issue. Arnold Toynbee was the British historian who died in 1975. He wrote the 12-volume History on the Rise and Fall of Civilizations. So he has studied why civilizations fall. And he said militarism has been by far the commonest cause of the breakdown of civilizations. And then of the 22 civilizations that have appeared in history, 19 of them collapsed when they reached the moral state the United States is in now. If you don't like Toynbee, how about Albert Einstein? It was his birthday yesterday, by the way, March 14th. And this is from the James Russell Einstein Manifesto of 1955. It's just a quote from a longer report. Shall we put an end to the human race, or shall mankind renounce war? This is a 2008 published book on World War II, the beginnings of it, by Nicholson Baker. And just note in red on the bottom, his view, the subtitle of the book was The Beginnings of World War II, the End of Civilization. I think we all should give some serious thought to what's going on. I'd like to now talk about a couple options. This building is, if you're in Washington, D.C., and you're facing the Lincoln Memorial, the building to your right, it's across the street. And I don't know if that's north, south, east, or west. I think it's north. But the building to your right is this beautiful building. And this is the United States Institute of Peace. A few years ago, when we were in Washington, we walked by it, and I'd never heard of it. I'd never seen it. And so we tried to find out something about it. We tried to get an appointment, actually, but couldn't initially, but we finally did. And the next year when we came back, we actually visited the USIP. Of interest is that in 2011, the House of Representatives voted to totally cut the funding for the USIP. The Senate had more wisdom and maintained the funding, so they're still going. This is their logo. And I'd like to talk to you about one potential example of the kind of work that they're capable of doing, and the kind of thing that gives me some hope. They were actually asked to intervene in Iraq in 2007 in an area south of Baghdad, which was called the Triangle of Death. 6 months before the USIP intervention, there were 93 IED attacks. This is improvised explosive devices, it's homemade bombs on the U.S. There had been 2 to 12 U.S. deaths a month, 12 deaths the month before they came, and over 1,000 Iraq civilian deaths a month. And in the 6 months after the USIP intervention, there was only 1 IED attack and 1 U.S. death, and the Iraq civilian deaths had dropped to 400 a month. And what they did was they got a group of Shiites and a group of Sunnis together, and they worked with them to establish government and some safety provisions, and this is the result of that kind of work, getting the enemies together to talk to each other. I'd like to end our talking briefly about the Nonviolent Peace Force. This was started by Mal Duncan and David Hartsoff, and we were privileged to hear Mal Duncan talk at that same College of St. Benedict Peace Program that I mentioned before. He was one of the founders of this. They had an office in Minneapolis. The main office is in Brussels. Their purpose is to create a space for fostering lasting peace, to protect civilians, especially those made vulnerable because of the conflict, to develop and promote the theory and practice of unarmed civilian peacekeeping so that it may be adopted as a policy option by decision makers and public institutions, and to build a pool of professionals able to join peace teams through regional activities, training, and maintaining a roster of trained, available people. Their main office is in Brussels. They have an office in Minneapolis, and it's interesting that nobody knows about this because Sister Pat Keith, who's a Franciscan sister, worked in this office in Minneapolis for several years. They have currently about 200 plus people in the field. It costs them $50,000 per person per year. They get a subsistence salary. It's an international group of people, both men and women. And the countries they're currently working in are South Sudan, Myanmar, or Burma, Mindanao, Philippines, and South Caucasus. They're not currently working in Sri Lanka anymore, although they worked there before. He told a couple of very heartwarming stories of the effectiveness of what they were doing. One of them was that in South Africa, they were able to negotiate the release of 46 kids that had been abducted and kept hostage. And in the Philippines, they had helped broker a ceasefire between the government and an Islamic group that were fighting, and they're now working to kind of maintain that ceasefire. So these are two examples, along with Kathy Kelly and the work of Erica Chenoweth, that I think gives some evidence that there's an option for nonviolence instead of war. I'd like to go back and pick up a couple things that I forgot. One is that Mal Duncan, when he gave this talk, he did a little exercise. He asked people to go to one side of the room or the other, whether they thought war would end during their lifetime. So yes would be that end, and no would be that end. And then he asked a few people why they chose to go to their particular place. Well, one of the students that was there went to the side of the room, way to the side of the room, that was no, war would not end during her lifetime. That's a pretty pessimistic viewpoint. So he asked her, why did you go there? And she said, because there's too much profit in war. Think about that. And then I forgot to mention that I'm surprised none of you knew about Kathy Kelly, or not surprised. She has spoken in Rochester 3 times. For one of her talks, the Peacemaker Group made a big effort at advertising it. We even took out a quarter-page ad in the Post Bulletin. So she's been here speaking, and none of her talks, in fact, none of our events have ever been covered by the Post Bulletin, with 1 or 2 rare exceptions. I don't watch TV, so I don't know if some of it is covered by television. If it is, it's probably only a 30-second spot. Well, let's go back to the quiz that I started with, and then I'll quit. 9/11/1973, that was the date the CIA helped stage a coup and overthrew the democratically elected president of Chile, Salvador Allende, and they installed General Augusto Pinochet, the brutal dictator. And 9/11/1906, that was the day Gandhi gave the speech that launched his first nonviolent campaign in South Africa to not cooperate with discriminatory laws against the Indian population that was in South Africa. Jeanette Rankin was the first woman elected to Congress. She was from Montana, and she was the only congressperson to vote against both world wars. She voted against World War I, and then she was out of office for a while, got reelected, and she voted against World War II. And after that, she was the only one to vote against World War II. And afterwards, she was threatened by an angry mob and actually feared for her life because of this mob when she left. Frank Kellogg is a senator from Minnesota, 1917 to 23. And then he did not get reelected. In 1928, he was Secretary of State, and he negotiated the Kellogg-Briand Pact under President Coolidge. This pact outlined war, except for self-defense. It's still the law of our country. It was ratified by the Senate with a vote of 85-1. And in 1929, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Well, I'd like to end with a couple more quotes from Scripture. Deuteronomy 30, verse 19. I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Choose life that your children and grandchildren should live. And then Ezekiel 36:26. A new heart I will give you, and a new spirit I will put within you. I will remove from your body the heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. Well, I'll end there and be happy to take any questions.
Hi, sir. Just a curiosity. What do you think the role of nonviolence is in relation to the Arab Spring? You know, it's essentially nonviolent revolutions overthrowing dictators, but in most cases have now been replaced by hardline Islamic regimes. And even in the one place, Egypt, that's been, you know, their military's come in, something like 1,000 Christian churches have been burned to the ground. That one just seems, the Arab Spring and nonviolence.
Well, the Arab Spring was successful in Egypt, obviously. They had an election and they elected a president. We happen to not like that president. We considered the Muslim Brotherhood, which he was connected to be a terrorist organization. So he was overthrown by the military. And it's a vicious military that now runs just as bad as Mubarak. In fact, I read recently that there were 185 protesters in Egypt scheduled for execution just a couple of months ago. I don't know what more to say about it than that. Nonviolent revolutions aren't always successful, as you saw. Only about half of them were successful. But I think the point Erica Chenoweth wants to make is that they're more successful than violent revolutions. She makes a lot of other points in her book that I didn't go into, but one of them is that the successful nonviolent revolutions at 1 year were much more likely to have a democratic society than the violent revolutions were, for example. So I don't know that I have more to say about it than that.
Rich, welcome to Zembro. I like your thinking, and I follow your thinking and the general principle. In the United States at this time, with what's going on in the world and the warfare that we're indulged in, where would you start?
I would stop drone attacks. I'd pull our troops home. I would stop Special Operations Command and stop that mostly secret activity that most of us don't know about. Those are starters. I think they would be very effective starters. Great message to the rest of the world. I would do a lot of other things. It kind of makes me think of President Obama's speech after we killed Osama bin Laden. I wrote an op-ed piece about this actually, where he said this shows how great America is. And it was the Special Operations Command, or people, of course, that were responsible for that killing. Well, I don't consider that to be the greatness of this country. I hope it's not the greatness of this country. I wish the greatness were more like what the Afghan youth volunteers are doing. I think stopping the drone attacks would be something quite possible. And after the Senate subcommittee hearing, I'm just surprised that nothing came of that, even protests. No comment. I'd stop torture also.
When Hitler was rolling over Europe, what would have been the practical, non-violent option?
Well, they're not certain that I have a good answer to that, but there are some examples of effective nonviolent activity against Hitler. As a matter of fact, Rosenstrassen women whose husbands were all in the concentration camp or in prison had a demonstration, and it was effective. He released their husbands. In Norway, teacher resistance in Norway, Hitler was unable to establish a foothold in Norway because of the teacher resistance. Now, a lot of them suffered. Some of them went to concentration camps and died. The United States helped arm Germany before Hitler became the enemy. Yeah, we did. I hope we would not have done that. Go ahead.
If the United States is under attack, do we defend ourselves?
All these theoretical questions, I don't have a strong answer for that. But I think that the likelihood of us being attacked is pretty small. I think you have to admit that, even you. And I think that if we did these other things that I mentioned, the likelihood would be even less. I mean, the attacks on 9/11, the terrorist attack on 9/11/2001, I think we clearly know the reasons for that, and we're not willing to do anything about it. I think also that there's a serious, probably the most serious chance of an attack on the United States is a nuclear attack. And we are not doing much about that. In fact, we're increasing our nuclear capabilities, not decreasing them. We have more nuclear weapons than any other country, well, except Russia, but almost as many. And we're just not leading the way in decommissioning our nuclear forces. We're doing the opposite right now. And that's in clear violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And if we really want to do something to help in that area, we would be leading the way. As one group of scientists said recently, that the United States is absent in this area, if not obstructionist. So, I mean, we've just made a deal with India to increase their nuclear weapon capabilities. I think we should stop that.
You made reference to the influence of kid movies. What about what goes on in our society today with, it seems to me all movies or most movies are violent. And the most exciting sports are those that are violent. And we even see parents, of kid sports teams who, if they get in a fight with each other, and there's just so much violence that involves youth. And what can be done, How can we start establishing peace? That element,
Well,
say nothing about the military.
I agree entirely with that statement. CC Heights, the sisters had a fundraiser. They have a fundraiser every Christmas where they have a silent auction. And they had, one of the things you could bid on were hockey tickets for the Minnesota Gophers hockey team. And I bid on that, and somebody who knows me came up to me and said, what are you as a pacifist doing voting for hockey tickets? Well, I was voting for my son-in-law, actually, who's a big hockey fan. I was trying to get tickets for him. But I agree with you. I mean, I think our kids are acculturated to this very early. I didn't mention in my talk, but my wife took our 13-year-old granddaughter to a PG movie just a few months ago, actually. And she came home and I said, what was the movie like? She said, wow, it was really a lot of fun, a lot of action, big action movie. I said, well, tell me a little more. You know, I questioned her a little more. What was the underlying theme? Well, the underlying theme was that there was a bad guy and the bad guy got killed. This slam dunk action. And it was so subtle that she didn't even pick it up. What effect do you think that has on our 13-year-old granddaughter? I just, we're acculturated to this.
Any other questions? I'm walking over to ask Pastor Shelley what's on the schedule next week, because I cannot remember.
That's all right. I'd like to first start by giving a great warm thank you to Dr. Dellen. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us.